Uh, so the topic we have mentioned was a school to prison pipeline, and part of, I think, the concern and the reason why we talk about this school to prison pipeline comes about because of kind of systemic and structural racism. And so we're going to kind of dig into one piece of that school to prison pipeline, and it's this idea of disproportionate minority contact. So let's start with a little bit of interaction. What do you guys think of when you hear that? That's a kind of strange, long, big 50-cent words. Disproportionate minority contact. What comes to mind for everybody?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is because I had a lot of experience working in the schools, is the disproportionate discipline, right, of minority students that then leads to most times, not completing high school and then entering possibly the legal system. So that's what pops into my mind.
That's perfect, and a great segue between those topics. Yes, so when we're saying disproportionate, we're saying that more minorities have contact with the juvenile justice system. That's where this, and we're going to talk today about why that might be, and kind of maybe some ways to mitigate or fix some of these issues. So juvenile justice system is what we're going to talk about today. So the definition of disproportionate minority contact is that the rate of contact with the juvenile justice system among juveniles of a specific minority group, oftentimes we're talking about Black versus white students. Hispanic students also come into play here, but it's often a conversation about white students versus Black students. So specific minority groups have significantly different rates of contact with the justice system compared to white non-Hispanic juveniles. And this includes, like Kelly was noting, this includes their disproportionate discipline in schools, all the way up to disproportionate arrests. And we actually know that they not only do they get arrested more frequently than their white counterparts, Black youth go deeper and further into the juvenile justice system. So just to kind of get us all using the same language. Some of you may be familiar with the juvenile court system. Some of you may be familiar with the adult court system. Some of you may not be familiar with either of them. And the juvenile court system uses some different language compared to the adult system. So I always like to go over the different word choices here. So when a juvenile commits an offense, we talk about there being like kind of an intake process where either the courts decide to take no action, to have formal charges, or to divert out of the justice system into other alternatives. If they decide to press formal charges on a juvenile, they go into a detention hearing. So this is where we decide, do they go to jail or not? We don't call it jail in juvenile justice system. We call it detention and detention centers. And so this is that hearing where you decide, should the person be released to their family while awaiting their court, or should they remain in detention? And so after the detention hearing, we have preliminary hearings. And again, none of them are going to be called trials. Everything's going to just be called a hearing. There's a preliminary hearing. The adjudicatory hearing is what you would call a trial in adult court. Adjudication is what we call, if somebody is found guilty in adult court, in juvenile court, we say they've been adjudicated. They've been convicted of the crime, they've been adjudicated of the crime. And so in juvenile court language, we say that the charges, they've been found to have committed the offense, or they are found to not have committed the offense. If they committed the offense, so if they were found guilty in adult court language, they then, instead of going to a sentencing hearing, they go to a dispositional hearing. Disposition is another word for sentencing. And the disposition hearing then decides, where do they go? Can they go to probation? Do they have to go to a residential placement? Or do they go to a juvenile correctional facility? Those are just some options, but it kind of gives us an idea of what is the flow of the juvenile justice system. So now let's talk about race and the juvenile justice system. So these are a little bit older statistics, but I talk about October as being Juvenile Justice Awareness Month. African American youth or Black youth are 9 times more likely than white youth to receive an adult prison sentence for the same crime. So you're talking about the same crime here. If the youth is Black, they're 9 times more likely to get an adult sentence rather than a juvenile sentence. Compared to white counterparts, and Latino youth are 4 times as likely as white youth to get that same prison sentence. And although Black youth only make up, you'll see the population here, they only make up 14% of the population. They're making up 40% of our population in secure placement. Compared to white youth, are making up 53% of the population, but only 33% of the population of secure placement. Hispanic youth make up 24% of the population, 23% of secure placement. So in this statistic, Hispanic youth are closer to what you would expect the placement percentage to be. Black youth are much higher secure placement compared to white youth. So these statistics take a look at, these come from the Sentencing Project. And this takes a look at what are called relative rate index. So it's a measure of the rate of racial disparity between white youth and youth of color at different stages of the system. And the RRI, what we mean by these numbers, on the side, you'll see numbers from 0 to 3 or 0 to 6 or 0 to 2.5. Let's take 2.0 for an example. This means that Black youth at the point of arrest is twice as common This means that at the point of arrest, it's 2 times as common for Black youth than it is for white youth. So just to be arrested, Black youth are twice as likely as white youth to be arrested. So the closer you're getting to 0, the less racial disparity that exists. And the further away we get from 0, the more racial disparity exists. So then they break it down by types of crimes. So curfew and loitering crimes, and they do it over time. So from the 80s all the way to 2011 here, we are looking at curfew and loitering. And so if you look at the yellow and the blue are the different race arrest rates, and that black is the percentage, that relative rate index. And so, at one point in the mid 90s, Black youth were being arrested Black youth were being arrested for curfew and loitering violations at 3 times the rate of white youth. And you can see it's gone down a little bit, but it's still 1.5 times the rate. And then you'll see the same thing here for property crimes. It was up to 3 times the rate arrests for property crimes, Black youth compared to white youth, again, down to 1.5. And then drug offenses here had been up to as high as 5, down here to 1. These ones are still in 2011 at 2.5 times the disparity, 2.5 times the disparity, 2 times the disparity, almost down to 1 when it comes to drug offenses. And it's possible that this has to do with changes in drug laws over that time, and the types of drugs that are being kind of sold and manufactured in 2011 were different than the types of drugs that were in circulation in the early 90s. So here's a look at different states. I know it's probably really hard to see the labels of the states, but this is looking at changes in disparity rates of youth incarceration, but from 2001 to 2015. So all of the purplish pink, these are increases in the racial disparity for incarceration. And all of the navy blue, these are decreases in racial disparity over that kind of 14-year time period. So the US average was a 22% increase in racial disparity between white and Black youth incarceration in that 15-year time period. And actually, here's a place that we can say West Virginia was doing better than most of the rest of the country. We actually saw a 57% decrease in racial disparity of Black and white youth incarceration between the years of 2001 and 2015. Maryland, our neighbor counterpart, had a 200% increase in racial disparity, so they're having some struggles there. I'm not sure the data from 2015 to now. Go ahead, Elizabeth, you had a question?
Yeah, this isn't trying to sound like we're not doing better, but do you think it's are they like taking the amount of population within the states? Because I'm sure Maryland has a higher population of Blacks than West Virginia, and I know Hispanics are only 2% in West Virginia. My mom's like one of them, so.
So I don't know that they're looking at percentage of white youth versus percentage of Black youth in West Virginia. One thing that I do think probably skewed these numbers a bit to help West Virginia is in 2013, 2014, other people who've been around the state for longer may be able to correct that time frame. We closed our maximum security prison for juveniles. We closed Salem Correctional, or sorry, the Industrial Home for Youth, which is now Salem Correctional. It's now an adult prison. So we closed that facility, sent all our kids to separate detention centers across the state. But I wonder if the closing of that facility lowered our incarceration rate, which showed a big decrease in disparity. Like, I'm wondering if we were able to get a number of Black youth out of the incarceration or that facility compared to before. So it probably is like elevated for fake reasons and not that we're just doing really good, because we all know that juvenile justice is a difficult issue in the state. So what might be causing this disproportionate minority contact? So I hope I've convinced you that it exists. We've seen the data, it's there. So we can't say, well, it's not a real thing. It's a real thing. We know that there's disproportionate minority contact. So now let's talk about what's causing it and how do we move past it. And so I'm going to make the argument today that there are two contributing factors to disproportionate minority contact, and that, like most things with psychology, it's not one or the other, but it's a combination of both of them. So the first one sounds a little bit like we're blaming the victim, but kind of hear me out on it, and we'll talk about how it's a combination of the two of them. So the first contributing factor is differential offending. And this is the idea that youth of color commit more crimes or commit more serious crimes than their white youth counterparts. So why are there more Black youth in detention and further into the system? Well, some people might claim it's because they're committing more crimes and they're committing more serious crimes than their white counterparts. And there's some validity to that idea. And this is not ignoring structural and different areas of structural racism, but it is that we do know that youth of color are committing more crimes and more serious crimes, and there's some reasons for it. And so the National Research Council has looked at this issue and concluded the totality of all these risk factors, so we're going to talk about minority-centered context for risk, all of these risk factors are such that minority youth are often born into and raised in severely compromised familial, community, and educational environments that set the stage for a range of adverse behaviors and outcomes, including problems in school relationships and engaging in pro-social behavior. So the system has been set up such that many minority youth live and are raised in these kind of risk-filled areas, compromised situations that lead them more likely down this path. And some of these risk factors include economically disadvantaged and unstable communities and neighborhoods, low-performing schools, delinquent peers, family risk factors such as single parents, incarcerated parents, harsh lacks or inconsistent discipline, and greater exposure to violence. So these situations lead them, they increase the risk factors, the likelihood of committing crime. And because more youth of color live in these types of environments, increases the likelihood they may commit the crime. So we've got the one side that's going to say youth of color are committing more crimes, so therefore there's more of them in the justice system than white youth. The flip side of the coin is the idea that the reason that there are more minority youth in the justice system compared to white youth is because they're getting differential treatment, right? And so this side of the coin says that the juvenile justice system treats youth of color different than they treat white youth. And we know this to be a fact. We know that our systems are set up in ways that if we look at the data, they treat youth differently. Minority youth are more likely to suffer harsher consequences at every stage of the juvenile justice process because the system treats them differently. And some theories, these are kind of sociological theories, are the racial or symbolic threat theory. This is the idea that decision makers are influenced by emotions driven by the perception of minority youth as threatening to middle class standards and public safety. So if we other people and we make a group of people, if we tell society that this group of people is scary or dangerous or threatening in some way, then we are teaching people to fear them and treat them differently. The other idea is that by labeling people, the labeling theory, the majority maintains their power because they label other groups as deviant. So they may take things that the majority group doesn't think, they may take things that the minority group thinks is okay or doesn't have a problem with, and they treat it as a problem. Think of things like dress codes that say that you can only have certain types of hairstyles, certain types of haircuts. Your pants can't be baggy. Well, maybe to minority folks, those are things that are valued and okay. But if the majority says it's not, then we get to point fingers at the other side and call them deviant. So again, like all things and most things in psychology, it is not one or the other, but it's that disproportionate minority contact is caused by the combination of differential offending and differential treatment of youth. So let's talk about the combination of these factors. How do they work together to cause this problem? What we have found is that youth of color have a differential opportunity for prevention and treatment. The effective programs that work to keep people from committing crimes or hanging out with delinquent peers or getting into the system or treatment, so interventions if they get caught in the system. Those effective programs are often inaccessible to minority youth, and they're designed for suburban white youth. So if our programs are developed and designed for white youth, of course our minority youth aren't getting to take advantage of them. If they don't get to take advantage of them, then they don't get the prevention. So then they get into the system, and then we don't have treatments in the system that works for them. Another contributing factor is that there's differential behavior. And this results when minority youth are involved in more serious crime. This is evident in that minority youth are involved in more serious crime. They're participating more deeply in gang activity. They begin delinquent behavior at a younger age. It's all of those risk factors we talked about before. And they're often involved in the child welfare system. So they're kind of already known to the system. And I don't know if anyone has worked in corrections before, but if an activity is labeled as gang activity, or if a person is labeled as being a part of or associated with a gang, you already escalate everything. You take a crime and you're already seen as more dangerous. You're already taken to the top of maybe more severe sentencing. So even if the person is not actually truly in a gang or their behavior was because of gang activity, the fact that maybe they think it's cool to tell the probation officer that they're associated with a gang, that just makes everybody more fearful, and it tips them into, okay, they need more severe crime, more severe sentencing, more severe dispositions. Another interesting, I find this one interesting. This is one of my blind spots. I did not think much about until I started looking into this literature. And it's the idea of mobility effects. Minority youth often commit delinquent behavior outside of their home areas. So, for example, malls used to be a big thing. Loitering at malls and getting in trouble at malls was a big thing in the past. Malls were built in suburban areas. They're not built in the inner city where the minority youth were living. They're built in the suburban areas. And so the youth, whereas maybe lots of youth would get caught loitering and doing silly juvenile behavior in a mall, the minority, lower income youth are outside of their home area and may see harsher punishment because of that. And then indirect effects. Socioeconomic status, education, location, and other risk factors are linked to race and ethnicity. So if we know that racial minorities often have lower socioeconomic status compared to majority youth, and these are risk factors for violent behavior or illegal behavior, then it's already contributing. A few more ideas about what causes disproportionate minority contact in the legal system. And it's the idea of disproportionate differential processing or inappropriate decision making. So the criteria used to make decisions about who is given formal charges and who is not. It's not applied consistently across all groups of youth. And this gets into labeling behavior as gang related. So if a white youth and a black youth both engage in the same behavior, but they label it as gang related for the black youth and not for the white youth, that black youth is more likely to get a harsher disposition, more likely to stay in detention simply because it was labeled as gang related. Justice by geography. Law enforcement is stricter and judges are harsher in jurisdictions with more minorities. This goes back to war on crime and, the broken window theories, the idea of we'll just put more law enforcement and we'll try to hold them more accountable in these lower socioeconomic areas, and that'll fix the issues. It's also known that law enforcement frequently patrols urban neighborhoods more so than suburban neighborhoods. So there's more opportunities for law enforcement to come in contact with a minority youth than there is for a law enforcement officer to come in contact with a white youth. Well, if you have more opportunities for them to come in contact, it's more opportunities for them to get caught doing something that their white counterparts are also doing but not getting caught for. The last contributing factor to talk about: legislation, policies, and legal factors.
Dr. Lillard, I just wanted to let you know it's almost 1.
All right, I'm gonna go a few minutes late to them.
All right.
We're gonna get through it. Thank you, appreciate it. So some of our laws are set up in such a way that exacerbate this disproportionate minority contact. Things like anti-loitering laws, those may disproportionately affect minority youth compared to majority youth. The other one is the crack cocaine laws. So for a very long time, the penalties for possessing crack cocaine were significantly higher than the penalties for dealing and possessing powder cocaine. Same substance, both are illegal, both are a drug. But minorities more likely to use crack cocaine. Majority white folks were more likely to use powder cocaine. So the powder cocaine was getting lower sentences. Crack cocaine was getting higher sentences. So we pushed minority youth and adults further into the justice system than we did white youth. simply by the laws that were made. I believe Barack Obama started to make the change. So now cocaine is cocaine and the laws are all the same. And I think that Trump was the one who finally like signed it into law. So Obama should get the credit, but I think it actually ultimately went to Trump for his work here. So what can we do about disproportionate minority contact? We can look at the direct services that youth are receiving. So we can look at differential offending by increasing our prevention efforts and our intervention efforts at particularly like target minority youth, target areas where minority youth are living, target interventions that we know work for different populations. Also increasing diversion programs and alternative to secure confinement for everyone, but particularly making sure that we're targeting minority youth. We can address disproportionate minority contact with training and technical assistance. This is where we do trainings and teaching, and we're educating people about unintentional racial bias. This is, you know, even today's lecture being able to talk about the fact that disproportionate minority contact exists kind of may open up the eyes of some people who are maybe in the majority and don't realize kind of the racial biases that do exist. Building cultural competence, cultural humility, and improving interactions between youth and juvenile justice personnel. This comes with, you know, law enforcement, you know, improving interactions between youth and juvenile justice personnel. Unfortunately, you know, it's not safe to be a minority in this country around law enforcement. And I think that everybody would like that to change. And then system changes, altering procedures, policies, and rules that govern the juvenile justice system to make sure they are kind of equitable across all racial groups. That was disproportionate minority contact. In a nutshell, I have references and links that'll go into the PowerPoint that Elizabeth will send you all today. There is this wonderful author, attorney named Kristen Henning out of Georgetown. She wrote a book called The Rage of Innocence. Got it here somewhere. It's a book about how America criminalizes Black youth. I got some tabs, but I haven't gotten very far into it. But you know, they talk about in here, I'll leave you with this. They talk about in here, there was this hashtag, kind of these tweets that were going around, and it was called hashtag criming while white. And it looked at how things are different between white Americans and Black Americans in terms of crime and what white Americans can get away with. So here's a couple of quotes. This was a hashtag criming while white. I dined and dashed. The cops found me at the movies. I paid the bill and he left. I was rude and not arrested or killed. Criming while white. Me and my grunge friends smoking in the mall. Mall cop tells us to move. We tell him to F off. He laughs and bums a smoke. Criming while white. Arrested for a DUI. Cop took me to drive through the ATM so I'd have money to bail myself out. Criming while white. Friend with a suspended license gets a flat tire and pulled over in someone else's car. The cop says he will use my license, the passenger. Criming while white. So these are just some evidence of things that white individuals have done and how law enforcement has reacted versus what has been done to Black youth and adults in America. So references about race and ethnicity in the justice system. There's a couple of pages here about different tools that we can use. If anybody has questions, we can talk more about it in a few weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Apologize for having to run.
No worries, Dr. Laird. Really appreciate it. And yeah, in a couple of weeks, just come up with some questions or take a look at that book if you have a chance. You know, I used to go into like bookstores and libraries just to read things, especially when I can't buy them. I just like read them there and then leave. But yeah, just read them in. You can come with questions. Our next time we meet is going to be March 6th with Dr. Swagger discussing SUD medications. So we look forward to seeing you guys then. And then the content will be in the new iEcho. And if you have any questions or don't get any of our follow-up recap emails through the new iEcho, please reach out and let us know. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and see you later.